Good afternoon, everybody. Pastor Scott here. I am recording a video because I was going to write a blog post on this book that I just finished reading, but it just seemed to me like it was going to take up too much time and too long of a post. So I just figured I'd make a video instead, and that's what we're doing. But the book that I'm talking about is Renn's Life in the Negative World, and if you're unfamiliar with him, he's been a cultural commentator. He's been a part of a conservative think tank in the past. He's done some other things as well. But he wrote an article several years ago where he kind of broke down the last three phases of American history from an evangelical perspective. And that article became viral a few years ago, and he apparently got offered to write a book on it, and he did, and that's this book. And I just found it so helpful as a pastor who's working with older people, with younger people, with people in the middle generations. This is really helpful. So I just wanted to talk about this with you for a few minutes, and hopefully this will be hopefully you'll find it to be helpful as well to you. But three headings that I have here that I wanted to break down. First, knowing the world we live in now. Renn shows that there are kind of three phases from the mid 1960s to now. From 1964 to about the early to mid 1990s, he refers to that as positive world. And in the positive world, it was easy to be a Christian, or easier to be a Christian in a lot of ways. Generally speaking, people had morals and values that reflected Christian ideals. Prayer was in schools. Ten Commandments were printed everywhere. I hear about this all the time from folks. But the world, generally speaking, had Christian morals. And there were balmy days, and I hear people talk about it all the time. They look back on that time and they wish we could get back to that. I understand it, I get it, because it was a positive world in which they lived back then. Around the early 90s, things began to shift a little bit. And from the early 90s to about 10 plus years ago from now, so the early 2000 teens, he refers to that time as the neutral world, and that is when morals began to change. They over the course of that time, the Christian ideals that were widespread accepted among Americans began to shift a little bit. Christianity was still respected, but it wasn't necessarily celebrated as much as it was before. But then there was a shift about 10 years ago, 10 plus. In this shift, about 10 years ago up until now, we've lived in the world that Renn refers to as the negative world. And in this world, it's at least weird to be a Christian, and at most considered by people to be dangerous to be a Christian, because you and I as Christians believe in what is considered to be outdated, weird beliefs that in the world's eyes oppress people and keep people back from happiness and all these kind of things. And so it's negative to be a Christian. And that is the world in which we find ourselves now. And a lot of older believers, they remember living life in the positive world. And so they wonder, like, what has happened? You know, it's clearly not a positive world anymore. It's a negative world now. Is positive world then? Well, it passed through a neutral time where things began to shift, and now we find ourselves in a world where we are, generally speaking, outcasts societally as Christians. In many ways, a lot of philosophers have argued, and Renn deals with this in the book, that we've returned to kind of pre-Christian paganism. Because there's generally speaking, there's no truth. People think that truth is subjectively defined, and I think there's probably some truth to that. I think everybody knows that truth exists, but they suppress it. They don't want to acknowledge it. But the idea of truth being subjectively defined, that's something that has been well established. Carl Trueman's books have talked about that. I saw the beginnings of this when I was a kid, when I was watching movies and TV shows, where you would always hear parents tell their kids, we just want you to be, what? Happy. And the idea is it doesn't matter what you do as long as you're happy. Truth is subjectively defined. That was beginning all the way back then in the neutral world, and now we've seen that grow up into really almost an entire paganism. that we find ourselves in now is sort of the culture's degenerated into paganism, I think. And I think that one example of this, or at least an adjacent idea to this, would be the rise of the post-Christian right. What we've seen recently, where you've got a lot of people who are on the political right who are actually not Christians. Or maybe they think that they are, but they're actually not. But I saw this last week when I watched the Republican National Convention. There were prayers to Hindu gods going on there. That's not a Christian practice. Abortion is considered to be okay under certain circumstances. LGBTQ society and those behaviors are okay under certain circumstances. And as long as you're a part of the party, that's okay. And I'm not saying that necessarily that's wrong for a political party to go that way, but it's different than it used to be. It used to be that on the right it was generally a religious right, generally a Christian right. Well, now it's not anymore necessarily. Things have really changed quite a bit. Conservatism is not just by definition Christian anymore, and this has been surprising to a lot of us, but it's the case. And so because the world has shifted, we're going to need to engage the world, Renn says, as we move into the second heading here, in a much different way than we used to. In the past, Renn says there have been three tendencies among evangelicals and how to engage the world. There's the culture warrior tendency. This is the religious right, led by individuals in the past, like maybe Paige Patterson is one example of this. Robert Jeffries down south, Dinesh D'Souza, Eric Metaxas more recently. Religious right, culture warriors who stand up and have they've got a sturdy jaw and they're willing to take punches and all that for the sake of standing up for what is right. Good things. But that's one way that has been approached. Another way that has been approached, Renn says, is the seeker-sensitive method, where you try to build big churches through being friendly. And so, like Rick Warren has been a leader in this, Bill Hybels, many others, Hillsong perhaps. You don't try to be pugnacious. You try to be friendly and build big churches. And that's one way to do it. And there's been a third way to do this, and this has been the cultural engagement method, where Tim Keller has been a major leader in this before he passed away to go on to be with the Lord. These very intelligent folks tends to be the case, not being dismissive of societal norms and cultural things, but rather defining the good, and then showing the negative in it, and then showing how Christ gives the ultimate good. And that's basically Tim Keller's preaching and teaching paradigm. And I just remember reading it for so long and loving it for so long, and I still do. I think there's a lot of good there. But Renn makes the case that with all these ways of engaging, either the culture warrior, the seeker-sensitive positivity thing, or the cultural engagement, because we live in a negative world now, and this is kind of a new development, things have shifted, and so we're going to have to engage differently. He talks about how the cultural warriors, they might survive this time, but it's going to be much smaller, in smaller pockets where the wagons are circled, and almost like outcast societies within society. But he talks about how future might actually be more grim for the seeker-sensitive and cultural engagement proponents, because so much of those approaches depend on being respected and liked, and we're not, as Christians, we're not anymore. We're not normal anymore. And we're different now, and so we're probably going to have to engage in a different way. And so I think that Renn, he really puts the attention first on individuals, saying that to move forward, we're going to have to make some decisions as individuals. We're going to have to be committed to excellence in whatever it is that we do. Not just for the sake of working unto the Lord, although that should be enough of a motivation because it's scriptural and God wants us to please Him and to participate in His Him, but also for the sake of shining light and wanting to do excellence so that we can be light in the world around us. We're going to also have to become resilient, not give up easy, be patient with things, because the kingdom is going to have to advance in the world like the mustard seed. We don't realize how it's growing, but it does. But we're also going to have to pursue strength, and he talks about this institutionally, communally, and in terms of ownership. So wherever we work, whatever institutions we're a part of, we want to be strong participants in it. We want to be good neighbors in our communities. We also want to pursue, he says, ownership, owning companies and owning businesses and things like that, where we can practice righteous business ethics and all these kind of things. We're going to have to pursue this if we're going to try to influence society for the common, for good and for the gospel moving forward. But that he focuses on that at an individual level, and then under the third heading here, he begins to talk kind of in more general terms about how believers in the church in general are going to need clarity on a few things if we're going to move forward. First, we're going to need clarity on what's true. We're going to need clarity on what's true and on what's right and wrong. I just remember whenever Ketanji Brown Jackson was being heard for her Supreme Court nomination, her position, she was asked famously, "What is a woman?" I think that was the question. What is a woman? And her response, if you remember, it was, "I'm not a biologist," because she didn't want to offend anybody. But that's the world. That's kind of a microcosm, a snapshot of the world in which we live. People are committed to so many. They have so many like social commitments that they can't just tell the truth. So they suppress the truth to the point where they get to the point where they don't even believe the truth anymore. They don't even know it anymore. That might be what's happened there. So we're going to have to be clear on the truth. We're going to have to be clear on what's right and wrong. Renn talks about how so many young men especially are listening to voices like Jordan Peterson's. And I love Jordan Peterson. Ben Shapiro, I love him. Matt Walsh, I like him. Andrew Tate, not so much. Don't really care for him too much. What do they all have in common? None of them are evangelical Christians. Shapiro is a conservative Jewish man. Matt Walsh is a Roman Catholic. Jordan Peterson might be coming to faith, but we're not really sure. Tate doesn't seem to be anywhere close. But why do men listen to these guys so much? And Renn makes the case that what they say, what these guys are saying, is more obviously useful than anything that young men are hearing when they go to church. Now, the church has the gospel. Let's be clear. That's the most important thing that there is. But we might have to look at the fact that young men are living in the world all the time, and they're thinking about the things of the world all the time. And so when they're in church, are we giving them useful help in how to really live for Jesus in their lives? If not, they're going to be listening to these other people. And that might be contributing as well to the post-Christian right that we're seeing here. They generally are holding to conservative ideals, but they're not gospel-driven. They're only gospel-influenced, perhaps. But so we're gonna have to have clarity on right and wrong, clarity on the truth, and finally we're gonna have to have clarity on engaging with prudence, with wisdom is another way of putting it. Having to make hard decisions. And one example would be when you're going into an election where there's not any candidate who you're totally happy with as a Christian. And in a negative world like the one in which we find, we're not going to have any candidates that we're totally happy with. So we're going to have to decide what's the best decision, who's the best candidate, who is going to promote righteousness the best, let the gospel advance the best, promote peace the best, all of these kind of things. We're going to have to learn how to think like that. And not lie to ourselves about a person's supposed Christian faith or something like that, and not lie to ourselves about our commitments to, maybe the party that our family's always voted for or something like that, whether that's on the right or the left. But we're going to have to, as Christians, look at candidates and say, my commitment is to the gospel first and foremost, to righteousness and peace. Which candidate is going to allow the gospel to advance the best in righteousness and peace as well? That's the most prudent approach, even if there's not a perfect decision to make. We're going to have to learn to live in that kind of mode of thinking in a negative world. So pick up Aaron Renn's Life in the Negative World. It's so helpful, very insightful, and it really, I think, gives Christians a way to think about how to navigate life in the negative world in which we find ourselves. And I hope that has been a helpful introduction to you. So Lord bless you. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.